In the quiet moments between meetings and ministry tasks, she often found herself wrestling with a profound weariness that seemed to settle deep within her soul. As a devoted Christian woman leader, her days were filled with an unending stream of commitments, counseling sessions, event planning, prayer groups, and countless other responsibilities that demanded her attention and energy. Yet, despite her passion and heartfelt desire to serve, a relentless cycle had taken hold, one she now recognized as the exhaustion loop. This loop was not simply physical tiredness. It was a spiritual and emotional drain that slowly but surely chipped away at her vitality. She described it as a constant hum beneath her daily life, a persistent pull to keep going, to say yes again and again, even when her body and spirit begged for rest. The culture of ministry around her often equated busyness with faithfulness, creating a subtle but powerful expectation that to be truly committed was to be always active, always available, always giving. In this environment, the pressure to keep up was immense, and the cost was often invisible until it became overwhelming. Reflecting on her journey, she recalled a particularly grueling season when her calendar was bursting at the seams. There were back-to-back meetings from dawn until late in the evening, phone calls that never ceased, and emails demanding immediate responses. Each ministry opportunity felt like a call she could not ignore, a chance to make a difference that she believed would honor God and serve her community well. But beneath this noble intent, a quiet exhaustion grew, manifesting as sleepless nights, a racing heart, and a creeping sense of disconnection from the very purpose that once ignited her passion. She shared candidly how during that season, the emotional strain became undeniable. Rather than experiencing the joy she once found in leadership, she felt drained and empty. There was a gnawing guilt that accompanied her fatigue, an inner voice that questioned whether she was falling short in her calling or lacking in faith. This internal conflict weighed heavily, as her deep love for God and her ministry clashed with the pressing need for rest and renewal. She described this tension as one of the most difficult aspects of her experience, the desire to serve wholeheartedly versus the undeniable signals from her body and soul that she needed to pause. What made the exhaustion loop so insidious was how it was often misunderstood within ministry circles. The outward appearance of tireless dedication was frequently praised, while the internal struggle remained hidden. She noted how many women leaders like herself found themselves caught in this trap, feeling isolated and reluctant to admit their weariness for fear of seeming weak or less committed. The culture of ministry, though well-intentioned, sometimes glorified busyness, unintentionally fostering a pattern where overextension was normalized and rest was overlooked. She vividly recounted moments when she would push through fatigue, driven by a sense of responsibility and love for those she served. Each yes to a new request was an act of devotion, yet it also tightened the grip of the exhaustion loop. The habitual overcommitment became a cycle that was difficult to break, as the momentum of nonstop activity left little room for reflection or self-care. She described this pattern as a kind of ministry treadmill, running fast yet going nowhere sustainable, where the line between faithful service and self-neglect blurred. The story she shared was not one of failure but of honest struggle, a reflection of the reality faced by many Christian women leaders who pour themselves out in service. She emphasized that the exhaustion loop is not a sign of weakness, but a common challenge that arises from a heart willing to give deeply. This recognition brought a measure of grace to her journey, allowing her to see that exhaustion was not a personal shortcoming, but a signal that something needed to change. She also explored how the desire to please others, both God and the people she ministered to, fueled her overcommitment. There was a powerful drive to meet every need and respond to every call, which often meant saying yes without fully considering the cost. This pattern was reinforced by internal expectations to be the good leader, who was always dependable and ready to step up. These self-imposed standards added an extra layer of pressure, making it harder to acknowledge limits or decline requests. The toll of living in the exhaustion loop extended beyond her ministry role, spilling over into her personal life and relationships. She shared how the constant demands left little space for rest, reflection, and renewal, elements essential for sustaining healthy leadership. The boundaries between ministry and personal time became blurred, and the weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. Yet, despite these challenges, she carried on, motivated by faith and a sincere commitment to her calling. Throughout this season, she grappled with the spiritual and emotional cost of the exhaustion loop. The very things that once brought joy and fulfillment began to feel burdensome. The disconnect from her spiritual purpose was perhaps the most painful aspect, as the exhaustion dulled her sense of God's presence and guidance. She described this as a profound loss, a moment when the vitality of her leadership seemed to fade beneath the weight of relentless activity. Her openness about this struggle serves as a poignant reminder that exhaustion is often an unspoken reality in ministry, especially among women leaders who may feel the need to carry heavy loads silently. By sharing her story, she invites others to recognize the signs of the exhaustion loop within their own lives and communities. She urges a compassionate awareness that embraces the complexity of serving with passion, while acknowledging the necessity of rest. This chapter of her journey is marked by a growing awareness, a recognition that the culture of busyness, while common, does not have to define her leadership experience. The internal conflict between the impulse to serve and the call to rest is a spiritual and emotional crossroads that many face. Her story lays bare the cost of ignoring this tension and opens the door to exploring new rhythms that honor both the heart of service and the need for renewal. As she reflects on this season, the exhaustion loop emerges not as a failure but as a shared experience, a cycle that many Christian women leaders encounter amid their desire to faithfully steward their gifts. It is a delicate balance, one that requires greater understanding and intentionality. Her journey begins here, with honest vulnerability and a heartfelt plea for grace in the midst of relentless ministry demands. As the exhaustion deepened, she began to look more closely at the patterns that had entrenched her in this relentless cycle. It was clear now that the exhaustion loop was sustained by more than just a heavy schedule. It was the habitual overcommitment and blurred boundaries that kept her trapped. Each new responsibility she accepted without pause compounded the strain, making it harder to step back and catch her breath. She realized that saying yes had become almost automatic, a reflex born from a genuine desire to serve, but one that had spiraled into an unsustainable pace. She reflected on the reasons behind this impulse to say yes so readily. Fear played a significant role, the fear of disappointing others, of missing an opportunity to minister, or of being perceived as less dedicated. This fear, though often unspoken, was a powerful motivator that pushed her to accept every request, regardless of the cost to her own well-being. She described how this tendency created an overwhelming and chaotic rhythm, where her calendar was filled without discernment, and her energy was dispersed across too many fronts. Alongside this external pressure, she wrestled with internal expectations that weighed heavily on her. She had long carried an ideal of what it meant to be a good leader, someone dependable, available, and always ready to give more. These self-imposed standards were deeply ingrained and often went unexamined, yet they intensified her fatigue and sense of burden. The internal voice that demanded perfection and constant availability added a layer of emotional strain, making it difficult to recognize when she needed to rest or say no. This awareness marked a turning point in her journey, a pivotal moment when she realized that continuing down the same path would only lead to further depletion. She began to explore what it might look like to break free from the exhaustion loop, not through sheer willpower, but by embracing a new way of leading, one grounded not in her own strength but in God's empowerment. This shift involved a conscious decision to prioritize intentional rest and establish healthy boundaries, practices that had previously seemed elusive or even counterintuitive within her ministry context. Intentional rest became a spiritual discipline, a deliberate act of stepping away from the whirlwind of activity to reconnect with God and renew her spirit. She described how this rest was not merely physical downtime, but a sacred rhythm of restoration that allowed her to hear God's voice more clearly and find fresh strength for the work ahead. This was a radical departure from the previous mindset, where rest was often seen as a luxury or a sign of weakness, rather than a vital component of sustainable leadership. Setting boundaries was another vital strategy she embraced. Learning to say no with confidence was a difficult but necessary step. She acknowledged that this was not always easy. There were lingering fears and feelings of guilt, but over time, she discovered that boundaries protected her energy and allowed her to focus more deeply on the commitments that truly aligned with her calling. By discerning which opportunities to pursue and which to decline, she began to cultivate a ministry life that was both impactful and sustainable. Prayer rhythms became an essential part of this new approach. Regular, intentional times of prayer and reflection helped her stay connected to God's guidance and resist the impulse to overextend herself. She shared how these moments of quiet transformed her perspective, providing clarity on where to invest her time and how to steward her gifts wisely. Prayer became a refuge and a source of empowerment, enabling her to lead from a place of spiritual strength rather than exhaustion. She also learned to evaluate ministry opportunities more thoughtfully, asking herself whether each request aligned with her core calling and values. This discernment process was a protective measure against the tendency to overcommit and helped her preserve her vitality for the work that mattered most. It was a practice of stewardship, caring not only for the people she served but also for her own well-being and spiritual health. Throughout this transformation, she encountered challenges and resistance, both internal and external. Old habits and expectations did not fade overnight, and there were moments when she questioned whether she was doing enough. Yet, the encouragement she found in God's faithfulness and the tangible benefits of rest and boundaries sustained her resolve. She described this phase as a journey of learning and growth, marked by incremental shifts rather than instant change. Her story highlights how the exhaustion loop is not simply broken by willpower, but by a fundamental reorientation of one's approach to ministry. It is a process of embracing God's empowerment, rather than relying solely on personal strength, and cultivating rhythms that nurture rather than deplete. This shift requires courage and intentionality, as well as a willingness to challenge cultural norms that equate busyness with faithfulness. She emphasized that these strategies are not about withdrawing from ministry or diminishing one's commitment, but about leading more sustainably and effectively. By establishing clear limits, cultivating consistent prayer rhythms, and discerning ministry opportunities carefully, she found a path that honored both her calling and her need for renewal. This approach allowed her to serve with greater joy and impact, free from the relentless pressure to do more at the expense of her well-being. Through her reflections, she offers practical wisdom for others caught in similar patterns. She encourages leaders to examine their own yes and recognize the power of boundaries as a form of faithful stewardship. She invites a shift in mindset, from one of guilt and obligation to one of grace and intentionality, where rest is embraced as a divine gift and a necessary part of leadership. This chapter of her journey is marked by a growing conviction that sustainable ministry is possible, and that breaking the exhaustion loop requires both self-awareness and spiritual reliance. It is a story of awakening to the rhythms God invites us to follow, rhythms that include not only service but also rest, reflection, and renewal. Her experience serves as an invitation to others to join in this transformative journey, embracing a healthier way to lead that honors God's design for both ministry and life. Emerging from the exhaustion loop was not an instantaneous release, but rather a gradual unfolding of freedom and renewal. As she began to live into the new rhythms of intentional rest, clear boundaries, and prayerful discernment, a profound transformation took shape within her leadership journey. The heavy fog of fatigue lifted, revealing a restored sense of energy and clarity that had long been obscured by relentless busyness. She described this renewal as a return to the joy that initially drew her into ministry, a joy that had been dulled by weariness and overwhelm. With sustainable stamina replacing constant depletion, she found herself able to engage more fully and authentically in her calling. The emotional turbulence gave way to a calmness rooted in trust and spiritual connection, allowing her to navigate challenges with a steadier heart and a clearer mind. One of the most tangible shifts she experienced was the confidence to say no, without the crushing weight of guilt that had previously accompanied such refusals. This newfound freedom was both empowering and liberating. Rather than feeling obligated to meet every request, she learned to focus her time and energy on ministries that aligned deeply with her purpose and calling. This intentional focus brought a deeper sense of fulfillment and effectiveness, as her efforts were concentrated where they could make the most meaningful impact. The transformation extended beyond her individual experience, rippling through the community around her. As she modeled sustainable leadership, others began to reconsider their own approaches to ministry and self-care. She noticed a growing culture that valued well-being alongside commitment, fostering environments where leaders felt supported in setting boundaries and embracing rest. This shift encouraged a healthier, more vibrant ministry landscape, where longevity and joy could flourish together. Through these changes, she found that leadership took on a new vibrancy, one that was not fueled by sheer willpower or relentless activity, but by a deep connection to God's empowerment and a balanced rhythm of service and renewal. Her ministry became an authentic expression of her identity as a servant leader, marked by passion tempered with wisdom and strength nurtured by rest. She shared moments of quiet triumph when choosing rest over obligation, or when discerning a ministry opportunity that resonated with her calling and saying no to those that did not. These decisions, once sources of anxiety, became acts of faithfulness that honored both God and her own well-being. The peace that accompanied such choices was a testament to the power of aligning ministry habits with God's rhythm, rather than cultural expectations. This renewal also brought a deeper spiritual connection, as she rediscovered the joy of walking closely with God amid her leadership responsibilities. Prayer and reflection became not just disciplines but lifelines, sustaining her through the complexities of ministry and grounding her in purpose. The exhaustion that once clouded her sense of God's presence now gave way to a vibrant awareness of His guidance and love. Her story became an invitation for others who felt trapped in the exhaustion loop to envision a different path, one where passion fuels service, rest restores strength, and leadership flows from divine empowerment. She emphasized that sustainable ministry is not only possible but essential for those called to lead. This vision offered hope to women leaders who longed for freedom from exhaustion and a renewed sense of purpose. Recognizing the challenges that still arise, she encouraged perseverance and community support as vital components of this journey. She invited her audience to join a network of Christian women leaders committed to navigating ministry complexities together, providing encouragement, resources, and accountability for healthy ministry living. This communal aspect reinforced the idea that no one must walk this path alone. In sharing her transformation, she painted a hopeful picture of leadership that embraces balance and joy. Her journey from exhaustion to empowerment stands as a testament to the transformative power of aligning ministry with God's rhythm. It is a call to embrace a fulfilling way of leading, one that honors both the heart's desire to serve and the soul's need for restoration. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.